Tommy Sheppard.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. In opening this debate, the Deputy Prime Minister cautioned against voting for Amendment A because he said it would alter the relationship between the Executive and the Parliament. That is exactly why we need to vote for Amendment A, because we must alter that relationship, because we are now in a situation where the level of dysfunction and inertia in our political system is without parallel. And we have a situation where we are in the midst of a political crisis which is mirrored only by our inability through the normal processes of government to do anything about it. So I think now we must take back control of the agenda, because we have a bizarre situation where the government of the day has brought its proposals twice to this Parliament, and twice they have been roundly rejected. And now, not only does it say it won't bring them back for a third time, it's taking its ball home with it, it seems, but it's saying it refuses to change its mind and vary those proposals so that there might be a route to a majority. And in those circumstances, there is no option left but for people other than those in the government to take control of the situation. But make no mistake, Mr Speaker, if Amendment A is passed, it will most definitely be an indictment upon and a censure of this government and the way it has conducted itself over the last 2.5 years. And what we need to know from the government is whether or not they are prepared to try and win back our trust, whether they will enter into this process with good faith in the attempt to try and see whether there is a majority in this House which they can be part of, or whether they just want us to exhaust ourselves running round in circles so that they will come along a week or 2 weeks later and put Plan A back again to be defeated. That is what we need to know from the government. Now, as others have remarked, we should have been engaged in this process 2.5 years ago, rather than leaving it to this last moment. But I think it was the Right Honourable Member for Beaconsfield who put his finger on the button when he said that the problem is that from the word go, the result of that 2016 referendum was hijacked by the winning side, and it was used in order to close down any debate about how the mandate should be interpreted or what it actually meant. Therefore, for the last 2 years, there has been a dialogue that has only involved the government, the ERG and the DUP. And thankfully, we are not yet in a situation in this country where that political axis commands a majority either in this House or in the country. And I would appeal to the government for the umpteenth time to try and reach out beyond its own narrow political confines and see if it is possible to build a political consensus in this country which can put our fractured politics back together. Now, Mr Speaker, we've heard this mantra of 17.4 million time and again, and I think we really need to confront this. In a democratic society, people don't just get one vote. People get a series of votes. And in a democratic society, each vote qualifies and updates the ones that came before. So what we need to know is what the views of the people are now, not what they were 3 years ago. And I firmly believe that while 17.4 million people voted for us to leave the European Union, they did not vote to endorse the prospectus the government has brought to this House. They did not vote for the harsh interpretation that the government has put onto that decision. And, for example, I don't think 17.4 million people voted to deny themselves and their children the ability to move freely around the European Union. I just don't believe it. I think that was part of the hijack. But most importantly, it is clear to anyone who wants to see that many of those people have changed their minds. And in a democratic society, people have the right to do that. So we need to test that decision again. And that means, I believe, that we are going to have to put this matter back to the people. So we don't need a short break in this proceeding, a short extension, in order to tweak what's already there. We need a fundamental rethink. We need to go back to the drawing board. We need to scrap the phony red lines that were imposed by this government and see if it is possible to come up with a new proposal. And in order to do that, and to give time for that to be put before the people, I think we will need a serious extension to this process. Now, thankfully, the European Union President Tusk and others have indicated that they would be happy to look at a much longer extension and it going back to negotiations if the government changed its red lines, if it changed its restrictive insistence on what this agreement had to do. So the option is there, I think, to go back. But if there are reasons, if there are complications in getting that level of extension, well, then the answer is quite simple. And the power lies with us. All we need to do is to revoke Article 50. Not, in my view, as a means of getting closure in the whole process, but in order to take back control of the process and give ourselves whatever time we need to formulate proposals and to democratically put them before the people. Now, Mr. Speaker, and I'll finish with this, that means that, of course, we run beyond May the 22nd, and that means we will be into having the opportunity to elect representatives to represent us in the European Union, of which we are still part. What is wrong with that, Mr. Speaker? How can it be that a bunch of people elected in a democratic election are so scared of having won in 2 months' time? Let us put this back to the people in an election. It will give us the opportunity to begin to redefine the narrative in this country, to try and explain to people that we gain most by common endeavour, to put hope in front of hate and to put hope back where there is currently despair. We can take a positive message to the people in those elections, and my party stands ready to do that. I don't see why others aren't ready to contest them too. And when we get the opportunity to run these elections in Scotland, you can bet for sure that we will also be taking the opportunity to explain to the people of Scotland that this process could have been avoided for them and they didn't need to go through this if they had the confidence to take the power for themselves and take back control and become a normal, independent country like the others in this world.
Peter Grant.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Two extremely difficult acts to follow, but I'll do my best within the limited time that I have. Mr. Speaker, we are now fractionally under 98 hours away from leaving the European Union without a deal. Friday night, we're out without a deal unless the government does something. And true to form, while the Right Honourable Member for Bishop Auckland, who I don't think is in the place just now, while she was listing earlier on some of the catastrophic impacts of a no-deal Brexit, what was the Brexit Minister doing? He was sitting there mouthing across to her, thanks to you, thanks to you, thanks to you. Even at this late stage, it's the fault of the Right Honourable Member for Bishop Auckland, it's the fault of the opposition, it's the fault of the Supreme Court, it's the fault of everybody, apart from the government, who claimed that they had a mandate from the people from a referendum in 2016 and who have failed dismally to bring forward a credible, workable, sensible, rational, even sane way of implementing that mandate. Mr. Speaker, I've heard today the withdrawal agreement being described by an ardent Brexiteer as a stitch-up between the Prime Minister and the European Union. Well, that may be the case, Mr. Speaker, because from day one the Prime Minister has sought to exclude anybody who might have been able to help in those negotiations who wanted anything different from her calamitous red lines. The government will still try to put forward the line that the Prime Minister's deal is the only one the European Union were prepared to offer. Not true, Mr. Speaker. It was the only one they were prepared to offer, the only one they possibly could offer within the confines of the red lines that the Prime Minister had used to paint herself and all of us into a corner. It's become quite clear, Mr. Speaker, those red lines stand in the way of any deal being acceptable to anywhere close to a majority in this House. Those red lines stand in the way of a deal that comes anywhere close to commanding a majority of support among the citizens of these nations. The red lines have got to go, Mr. Speaker. And if that means the Prime Minister has got to go, then the Prime Minister has got to go itself. It's not only the Right Honourable Member for Broxtowe who has to be prepared to say this is much more important than the future of one person's political career. We have a Prime Minister who promised herself a free vote, fipped herself to vote against it and then lost. With government whips giving contradictory advice to different ministers about whether the whip existed or whether it is 1, 2 or 3 lines. Good luck to them trying to count whether they've got 325 votes for tonight if they struggle sometimes to count up to 3. So we've got a Prime Minister who not only can't control her own party, she now can't even control her own cabinet. She can't go in one direction because half the cabinet will quit, and she can't go in another direction because the other half will quit. Well, perhaps, Mr. Speaker, it's time the whole lot of them quit. Back to the people. In any other democracy, if the government failed to get its flagship policy through Parliament, the head of state would have two options: a new Parliament or a new government. In this democracy, or supposed democracy, Mr. Speaker, of course, when you get a chance to have a new Parliament, you also have a chance to have a new government. And I find it astonishing that growing numbers of members on the benches opposite are saying they should be allowed a third chance at the meaningful vote, because they didn't understand that no deal might be taken off the table. The circumstances have changed. If they had known that the second vote was the last chance they would got, they might have voted differently. Oh yeah, is that the case? Is it the case that if people realise circumstances have changed and they haven't understood what they were voting for, they should be allowed another chance? That's a good idea, Mr. Speaker. If it's okay for a few hundred Tory MPs, it sure as heck is okay for 60 million of the citizens that put all these MPs into place in the first place. And we hear members talking about the number of people who took part in the referendum. Can I remind members, the referendum didn't ask what people wanted. We're here 3 years from the referendum, fewer than 100 hours left till they crash out without a deal, and none of us can claim to know what any of those 17.5 million people were voting for. We know who they were voting to leave, but none of them were asked to vote on where they wanted to go. That is why we have got to come up with a solution that commands the respect of this House, and then put that to the people. And it won't be the solution that I think is preferable. It may not be my first choice, but it has got to be something that, including those who voted to leave, those who voted to remain, and those who didn't vote at all, they've got to be given the choice as well. And, Mr. Speaker, I'll finish by saying I've been reluctant to endorse wholeheartedly the campaign to revoke Article 50. But if it becomes a choice between my nation being dragged out against the wishes of 62% of our people and two other nations having to revoke Article 50 with the option of coming back for another go later on, then Article 50 has to be revoked. In the not too distant future, Mr. Speaker, another treaty will be revoked thanks to the sovereign will of the people of my nation.
Matt Rodda.